It was a frigid night in October 1995 in St. Louis, Missouri, and I, Mike, was stuck on my night shift as a pizza delivery man for Marco's Pizzeria. The city streets bustled with costumed children running after candy, their laughter echoing among carved pumpkins and twinkling lights decorating the houses. My body was begging for rest after a tiring day, but my boss, Tony, stopped me just as I was about to leave. "Last order, Mike," he said, holding up a steaming pizza box. "It's near Bell Fountain Cemetery at 4947 West Florissant Avenue. The customer paid twice as much for you to deliver tonight. Don't make me beg." I grunted, exhausted, but the extra money was a temptation impossible to ignore. Bellefontaine was not just a cemetery. He was a living legend in St. Louis. Founded in 1849, it housed the graves of historical figures such as William Clark, and rumors of shadows slipping between tombstones, lights flickering for no reason, and whispers that seemed to call your name were part of local folklore. I didn't believe in those things, or so I kept telling myself as I loaded the pizza into my 1989 Honda Civic, whose engine roared as if it wanted to escape, too. The road to the cemetery was deserted, and a thick fog began to form, enveloping the trees like a ghostly veil. The headlights barely cut through the gloom, and the silence was so oppressive that I could hear my heart beat. The normally busy Avenue Florissant looked like a forgotten road, with bare branches leaning toward the road like bony fingers. As he drove, a figure appeared on the side of the road, his thumb outstretched. She was a young woman, perhaps 20 years old, in a long white dress that fluttered softly, although the air was still. Her dark hair fell in waves over her shoulders, and her skin was so pale that it almost shone under the moon. His shoes, with old-fashioned buckles, looked like something out of a movie from the 1940s, and his posture, fragile and lonely, gave me a chill. Doubted. Picking up a stranger at 9 p.m. near a cemetery was crazy, but something about his figure, almost ethereal, made me slow down. I rolled down the window, and a cold air crept in like an icy knife. "Are you okay? Where are you going?" I asked, my voice trembling more than I wanted to admit. She looked at me with dark eyes, deep as bottomless pits, and whispered, "Only to the entrance of the cemetery." His voice was soft, almost an echo, and it gave me goosebumps. I nodded, unlocked the door, and she slid into the passenger seat without making a sound. The car was filled with an icy cold, as if it had entered a cold room. I turned up the heat, but nothing changed. I tried to speak to calm my nerves. "Do you live nearby? What are you doing here so late? Did someone leave you?" She didn't answer, just staring straight ahead, her hands folded in her lap. Her dress had worn lace, and the shoes had a strange sheen, as if they didn't belong in this world. My skin stood on end, and a knot formed in my stomach, but I told myself it was just my imagination. As we approached the iron bars of Bell Fountain, the fog thickened, swallowing the street lights. The trees seemed to lean lower, their shadows moving as if they were alive. My heart was beating like a drum, and my hands were sweating on the steering wheel. When we got to the entrance, I stopped and said, "We're here." I turned to see her come down, but the seat was empty. My stomach flipped. I looked in the rearview mirror, out the windows, even got out of the car, looking for footprints in the wet grass. Nothing. Then I saw her. She was standing in front of the cemetery gates, a few meters away, looking at me with a sad smile that froze me to the bone. His eyes seemed to pierce me, filled with infinite sorrow. Before she could scream, her figure began to fade, as if the fog sucked her in. His eyes were the last thing I saw, fixed on me, before he disappeared completely. I froze, trembling. What the hell was that? I tried to convince myself that I had imagined things, that maybe she had run somewhere. But I couldn't shake the image of his smile. With trembling hands, I drove to the customer's house, a few blocks from the cemetery, and put down the pizza. The man who opened the door looked at me strangely, but said nothing. Back at the venue, I told Tony everything. He laughed, but then looked at me seriously. "That sounds like Hitchhike Annie," he said. He told me about a young woman who died in an accident on that road in the 40s and now appears to drivers, vanishing at the entrance to the cemetery. I researched the local library afterwards and found similar stories, drivers picking it up, only to see it disappear. Some say that he is looking for someone who never arrived, others, that it is trapped in an eternal cycle. Since then, I avoid that road, especially on foggy nights. But sometimes, when I'm driving alone, I'll glance sideways at the side of the road, wondering if she's still there, waiting. I'm Maria Gonzalez, funeral director at Calvary Cemetery, 5239 West Florissant Avenue, St. Louis. My job is to make sure funeral services are flawless, from the viewing in the chapel to the burial in the assigned plot. Calvary is a vast place, with 470 acres and more than 300,000 graves, some of historical figures such as Tennessee Williams and General William Tecumseh Sherman. By day, it is solemn. At night, the silence is so heavy that it seems alive, as if the cemetery holds its breath, watching your every move. A few weeks ago, we organized the funeral of Jose Hernandez, a grandfather loved by his large Latino family. The wake was in the cemetery chapel, with the coffin open surrounded by white flowers and flickering candles. Family members shared memories, how Jose sang rancheras with a voice that filled the house, how he always had wise advice, and how he never got over the loss of his wife and son in a car accident in the 80s. The mass was solemn, and the burial, in a quiet plot under centuries-old oak trees, was heartbreaking. When the last relatives left, the sun had set, leaving the cemetery shrouded in shadows and fog. I stayed in the office to finish the paperwork. It was almost 9 p.m., and the only light came from my desk lamp and the moon filtering through the large window overlooking the graves. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the whisper of the wind. I was going through the details of Jose's service on my computer when a soft tap sounded on the window. I was startled, my heart leaping. I looked outside, expecting to see a branch or a bird, but there were only tombstones lined up under the silver light. "It's the wind," I murmured, though there were no trees nearby. I tried to concentrate, but my pulse wouldn't calm down. Minutes later, a louder bang shook the window, as if someone had thrown a small stone. I jumped up, my hands trembling. I looked out the window, but the fog was so thick that I could hardly see the nearest graves. I called the night guard, John, on the walkie-talkie. "John, can you come to the office? Something hit the window." My voice sounded scarier than I wanted. "I'm going there, Maria. It's probably the old building," he replied, his usual calm tone. He arrived in minutes, and we went out to inspect. The fog swirled between the tombstones, and the air was frozen, cutting like a knife. We walked around the office, John's flashlight lighting the way. We found nothing, no broken branches, no footprints, no signs of intruders. "This place makes weird noises," John said, shrugging. I nodded, but I didn't believe him. Something was not right. I went back to the office, trying to focus on the paperwork, but the air became icy, and I could see my breath condensing. The lights flickered, casting shadows that seemed to move on their own on the walls. Then, a loud knock echoed through the door, as if someone demanded to enter. I screamed, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would jump out of my chest. I grabbed my flashlight and cell phone, my hands trembling, and went out into the cemetery, unable to stay there. I walked along the gravel path, flashlight illuminating the tombstones. The creak of my footsteps was the only sound, but I felt a presence, as if someone were watching me from the darkness. As I passed by the Hernandez plot, I saw a shadow in the distance, near Jose's grave. He was an old man, in a dark, antique suit, standing motionless, staring at me with eyes so sad that they seemed to pierce my soul. His face was blurred, almost non-existent, as if the fog had erased it. His eyes, however, were clear, filled with a pain that made my blood run cold. I screamed and ran toward the office, stumbling on the gravel. The cold followed me, like an invisible hand squeezing my back. John caught up with me, panting. "What happened, Maria? What did you see?" "A man at Joseph's tomb. He was looking at me," I stammered, barely able to speak. We returned together, flashlight shaking in his hand, but no one was there. The flowers on the tombstone were intact, as if nothing had happened. The next day I checked the funeral records. When I saw Jose Hernandez's photo, my heart stopped. It was the man I saw with the same sad eyes. I asked his family, and they told me that Jose never got over the loss of his wife and son. Was his spirit gripped by pain or something darker that inhabits Calvary? Now, every night shift is a test. I feel invisible eyes in the darkness, and the cold seems to follow me through the corridors. The dead do not always rest here. It was Halloween 2010, and my friends Jake, Sarah, and I wanted an adventure that would give us goosebumps. We decided to go to Jefferson Barracks National Cemetery at 2900 Sheridan Road, St. Louis. Founded in 1826, this military cemetery is famous for its stories of ghost soldiers and local tragedies, such as accidents on nearby roads. We thought telling horror stories among the graves would be the perfect way to feel the adrenaline. We arrived just after dark. The moon illuminated the rows of white tombstones, all identical, like a silent army. The air was cold, and an eerie silence enveloped us as we looked for a place to settle down. We found a clearing near some twisted trees and spread out a blanket. Sarah pulled out chips, soda, and a flashlight, and we started on our stories. The wind was rustling through the tombstones, and each crack made us look over our shoulders. Sarah went first, telling about a headless soldier wandering around the cemetery, looking for his lost skull. Jake followed up with a story about shadows that moved on their own in the old military hospital where nurses swore they heard wailing. I told of a blank woman who appeared near the entrance, warning visitors to leave before it was too late. We laughed, exaggerating details and mocking each other, but the darkness seemed to tighten around us, as if the cemetery were watching us. Then I heard a slight, almost inaudible laugh, like a child playing. I was silent, listening deeply. "What was that?" I asked, my voice lower than I intended. Jake laughed. "The wind. Genius. Don't get carried away." Sarah scoffed, but we all pricked up our ears. The sound didn't come back, so we went on with our stories, eating chips and trying to ignore the chill that ran through us. But the atmosphere had changed. The air felt heavier, and shadows seemed to move at the edges of our vision. A few minutes later, the laughter returned, this time clearer and closer, as if a little girl were right behind the tombstones. We freeze, with fear growing in our chests. "Did you hear that?" whispered Sarah, her eyes wide. "That wasn't the wind," I said, my heart pounding. Jake, ever the brave one, stood up. "Maybe she's a lost child. Let's see." We walked to the place where the laughter came from. With Sarah's cell phone as a flashlight, light trembled in his hand, illuminating the moss-covered tombstones. The cold intensified, and the silence between the laughter was more terrifying than the sound itself. Then, the laughter changed. It was no longer a single voice. They were several girls, laughing around us, their voices cheerful but chilling, as if they came from a place we couldn't see. Laughter seemed to surround us, moving between the graves, closer and closer. Terrified, we ran to the exit, stumbling in the darkness. The laughter followed us, echoing like an impossible echo. As we arrived at the entrance, a security guard intercepted us, annoyed. "What are they doing here so late?" he growled in a uniform that looked old-fashioned, made of worn canvas. His eyes were strangely empty, as if they didn't reflect the light. "Leave before I call the police." We do not argue. We ran to the car and drove off, trembling, fear still throbbing in our veins. The next day, at school, we told what happened. A friend looked at us strangely. How strange. At that time, there is no guard at Jefferson Barracks. We researched on the internet and found an article about an accident in the 50s. A guard and his two daughters, ages 7 and 9, were killed when their car was hit by a train near the cemetery. They are buried there. Were those the girls we heard? And the guard? We never went back, but sometimes, in the stillness of the night, I think I hear those laughs, and I wonder if they are still playing among the graves, waiting for company. These 3 chilling stories, based on real-life experiences of St. Louis cemeteries, will leave you looking over your shoulder. From the ghost hitchhiker of Bellefontaine to the restless spirit of Calvary and the laughter of the children at Jefferson Barracks, these accounts show that the dead don't always rest in peace. If you got chills, leave us a comment with your own paranormal stories, or tell us which one scared you the most. And don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Night Terrors for more tales that will keep you up all night.